And this is for involvement in benzodiazepine overdose. So these aren't all of the prescriptions out there that have the benzos with opioids and ones without them. This is strictly the benzos with opioids that led to overdose and the benzos without opioids that led to overdose, and then the total.
Okay, so among overdoses, here's the breakdown in the different ones.
Which is why it's important, especially when you have an increase.
So what we're seeing here is the ones without opioids aren't the bulk of the issue, and they haven't really changed over the course of 13 years. The ones with the opioids are the bulk of the issue, and we got a big jump in like 2010%.
Well, that's when it comes to overdose. When it comes to mental health, in terms of things like managing stress, that's a whole nother discussion. But yeah, when it comes to
hold on a second, Jeremiah has a really good question. He's wondering if maybe the drop there in 2011 was about the change in laws involving the opioid. Jeremiah, do you know when that happened? Because that seems pretty plausible, right?
Yeah, from 2011, 2012, right here, this drop.
Yeah, it's an obvious big drop.
What was it that happened in 11?
Well, that's what Jeremiah said. There's like a change in laws. Maybe that was the issue.
Oh, Obamacare, right?
Maybe. Oh, you know what? I didn't think about that. Maybe that's the change in the funding created changes in drug choices for some demographic or other. Interesting.
Yeah.
That's a possibility. And you might even say the change started in 2010. You can see it sort of drops off. But yeah, by 2013, the original trend is right back. Like the same.
And you could even say, I'd be interested, I'll have to pull some up on it for today's date to see if that trend continued, because it looks like a more aggressive trend. I'd have to analyze it more than the trend that was going on right before the dip. So if it were to continue on that same trajectory, it could, I mean.
So this is something that we brought up before in our original conversation way back when. There's a very good chance that there's folks in the medical community that are somewhat familiar with this pattern. Have you investigated that at all?
To a certain extent. I mean, I've had these discussions and debates with it's been more political. You know this, but I was doing the political thing with the campaign stuff last year. And so I talked with a couple people on the political side of it. After talking with you today, I'd like to talk with some people on the medical side of things and get perspective from there. I mean, I've researched the medical side of things and talked to people medically in terms of doing my research, but not in terms of submitting anything.
Well, so let me describe. This is something that I learned from Karl Popper. You can sort of see the patterns in the process, and you can make judgments about the veracity. Conspiracy theorists often have 4 or 5 graphs, and that's all they really have. And it's sort of like this really thin, tenuous connection between the data and their conclusion. And then there's folks like you and my stepdad used to do this too. He'd go researching, and he'd end up with a stack of data taller than your freaking arm, and every single part of it corroborated the same general picture. And that's kind of what I'm seeing here with what you got.
Yeah, that was the objective going. The question I asked before I started looking into any of this was, why does it feel like the majority of the major gun issues happen in a certain age range? That was the question I asked.
Like, that was the first thing that triggered your intuition. Like, why is it always these guys?
Why is it this age range for the most part? Now, the obvious answers that came to mind was they're more agile. I'm more agile at 34 than someone at 64. That age range is more agile than me at 34. At 17, they're more agile. They're more active. They have more testosterone. Probably at 17.
I hear more testosterone, and I think they might make dumber decisions.
Exactly. So all of these things going through the head, and then it's like, okay, but all of these things are things that all of us experienced, and it seems like there's a bigger spike happening than what I've known my whole life to be.
Things that, like the bullying and the bullshit you put in school, like that's not a new thing. Yeah.
So exactly. So I mean, if we wanted to say bullying was the key cause of it, then why weren't there? I mean, the Black Panthers carried guns around, in the 60s. Why weren't they? And there was Jim Crow laws around. You're having, you're having segregation. You could have had a lot more, school shootings happening during that time because of bullying.
Those kind of stresses were a whole different story.
Yeah, and so yeah. So yeah, and then effectively then it's like, okay, you got social media, you got entertainment, you have access, so you have more information, you have more detachment. But then it was like, but that's all so subjective. Is there anything different? And that's when I started looking at the pharmaceutical side of it. I told you how I've been prescribed Adderall in the past, and I wanted to see if there was a relationship there. So and then it was to try to prove myself fucking wrong. It still is. I'm still trying to prove myself fucking wrong on the pattern. And I wouldn't be upset if I did prove myself fucking wrong on the pattern. But the reality is the whole objective was to say, is there something I can point to here? Because it's clearly not fucking guns.
Well, that's a conspiracy theorist has this tenuous connection across a handful of pieces of information that says, well, it could be. And then you have this vast amount of data, but when it comes to proving it, the people who want to disprove it, they can just sort of run away from that chain of thought that the conspiracy theorist, it's kind of a reverse dynamic. Like you have to provide all of the walls that force the would-be guy, the would-be conspiracy theorist to say, okay, you're right, there's no way out of it.
I have to try to close the doors before they can open them. I lock them. Yeah.
And you really have done this. Like you've anticipated these challenges. Let's suppose, for the sake of argument, that the medical community, and we talked about this before, very often the constellation of perverse incentives can create this situation that kind of looks like a giant conspiracy when there's really nobody at the center of it. Nobody really wants this outcome. It's just sort of like a side effect of these twists in everybody's thinking.
Yeah.
Assuming that we don't have some cabal that's actually trying to reduce population by making people crazy and shoot shit.
Yeah.
Who are the decision makers that you'd actually want to talk to and show this to?
I would want it to be some kind of medical individuals to get some kind of publishing, but beyond that, it would want to be more parents or just in general, just access to the information. I'm not the best at putting it together in a concise manner, so maybe have someone better than me at that put it together in a concise manner and give it for consideration. It's not like I want the whole market shut down. What I would like is for the market to be there along with something like a decriminalized medical marijuana market federally, so that the whole options are on the table and all of the information and patterns are out there to be had themselves. That's generally speaking, that's what it should be for fucking everything. But specifically when you have spikes like this, I look at this chart with 15 to 29 and I'm having a 2 and a 4 year. It's crazy.
So we talked before about predictions. I just thought of a prediction that may very well play out. You said, legalization that provides options. Lots of people are aware of the option. Lots of kids age 15 and 29, they can just go buy some weed and get baked. So legalization should theoretically be, we should see a change. We should see an alteration in this kind of overuse.
I can cite in states that have at least medicinally legalized marijuana, there's a 22.6% decrease. This was a 2014 study, I promise you, I'll link that after this in the comments. But study decrease in opioid overdose for those states that at least had medically legalized medicinally marijuana. So you do actually see that. You see the reverse action happening on the overdose side. I haven't looked into the states for shootings, so I'll do that also.
Jeremiah mentions, people might use this for political reasons, and this is a good example of where I often disagree with people about. No, there's no conspiracy here. The politicians who might like to take advantage of this, they're not the ones diagnosing the kids. They're not the ones deciding to give them the drugs. So there's a disconnect there. Like a politician wanting to use something for their own gain, you can't really read a lot into that. Mandy says that pharmaceutical companies are taking advantage of parents. that's probably true too. But I think it's almost as easy to say the pharmaceutical companies or the doctors who are buying the pharmaceutical products are just trying to make the parent happy. They're just trying to find something that will get them some relief or get their kids some relief.
Critical error philosophy.
They're not doing the long-term studies, the longitudinal 5-year, 7-year outcomes to see that delay pattern that you're talking about.
Yeah, there's a quote by, and this was a scientist, I can't remember his name, but he said after Einstein changed his position, after Hubble showed him the universes or the galaxies in the Hubble scope, and Einstein said that the evidence he saw says there must have been a beginning to the universe, that it was expanding. And it frustrated this British scientist so much, he said he resented it. It left him cold. And I only say that to say this is how married some people can become to their self-worth when it comes to their sciences or their profession of any kind for that matter. So it doesn't have to be an intentional thing for it to be. We're all beings that can be prideful. So at any point, a pharmacologist can be equally prideful about the fact that they know that this is what's meant to be for this kid, and they're sure of it, no matter what the fuck the telescope says. And that's kind of the issue.
There's a thing from the world of sales, the 10% rule. You know, if 10% more teachers are saying, wow, this kid might have ADHD, and 10% more of the parents are going along with that, and 10% more doctors are prescribing it, and 10% more of the pharmaceutical reps are pushing it, all of a sudden there's your factor 4 increase where nobody really pushed all that hard.
Yeah. Well, all you had was a lot of small, pushing going on, but it was just happening at different levels. It was like these different weakened legs of a stands or something and being pushed until the whole thing collapsed. I mean, that's how something falls, right? You got these stands and you don't need much pressure to break it over if you hit all 4 at once.
Well, exactly. Like small changes in lots of different places, all pushing the same way. And that's the other thing is that the positive feedback loop, I think that's a big part of it. Like a factor of 4 increase, that kind of thing screams positive feedback loop. Negative feedback loops are how you get that moderating influence. Those those up and down cycles, the consistently increasing cycle. That is often a tell. It's a giveaway for a positive feedback loop.
Yeah. Hold on. Sorry, this thing just fell here. You mentioned earlier it being maladaptive, meaning the intended usage is actually having a counter property to it from a physiological brain.
Yeah, like and you and I talked about this in private. The best clinical outcomes for depressed patients is regular exercise. If they get out their butts every day for 20 minutes or half an hour, they feel better after 6 weeks. The difficulty is, are they going to get out their butts for that first 6 weeks? And so one use for these medications is to get them feeling good enough to get out their butts and take some positive steps that will produce those long-term outcomes. But the issue is for the positive feedback loop is if people end up just on these drugs, the way you put it, like the drug doesn't help you get to the lifestyle, the drug becomes the lifestyle.
Yeah.
That 5-year delay, like that, a delayed outcome always creates difficulty in the world of science and politics. The longer the delay, the harder it is to deal with it because the harder it is for people to see it or care about it or anticipate it. Completely agree.
Yeah.
So that may be why we haven't seen it much in the sense of the medical community, because the delay made it not at all obvious.
Well, when we think about ourselves, for the most part, when there's something that's not working, we want to look at like the things that it could be that's not related to us, and that you could argue it could be the medical pharmacology community right now when it comes to things like this. I'm sure there's some people in the pharmacology community who see this and are like, this is interesting considering how recent it is we started doing all these pharmaceuticals. But they don't, they're going to protest guns or they're going to protest video games well before they're going to protest their own fucking industry, right? Ultimately,
and there's a twofold challenge there. We're questioning the doctors and the parents. These are two people. These are two groups. Two influences in the kid that we're really doing our best to trust these guys because what else do they got?
Yeah, there's a level of reliance on those parts of society where you say, not in the way Hillary Clinton means it, but it takes you're trusting on certain people within the village of your community to make sure you're trusting your doctor, you're trusting your pharmacologist, you're trusting these people, and ultimately to have it be coming back to where there's this reverse property that's almost creating the opposite effect. You have to be able to objectively look at yourself and just say, bye. Yeah, this isn't working. And that's, I think, where we're maybe 10 years away from, unless something happens beforehand to stop it.
Right. So Mandy says, and Mandy's a nurse, so she knows the medical community needs to wake up. I'm saying the hand sanitizer situation proves that is a possibility. We've seen evidence where they're like, wait a second, this is not working. We got to back our asses up. I'm really curious, and maybe I haven't really looked into this, but just using the hand sanitizer thing as an example, who was it that said, hey, this is a problem? Who is it that actually, was it the CDC? Was it the World Health Organization? Was it some doctor? Was it some, consortium of nurses? Who was it that actually, did the whistleblowing and found the people that will communicate to the rest of the industry? I don't know about you. I'm not a doctor, but I'm trained in science. Some of these correlations, it's outrageous to just blow them off. You can't just blow them off.
Right. That's the thing about it is when you look and going out to it again, the objective was to disprove myself on things. But when you start seeing these kind of trends happening with such relationship, and sometimes you can just look at the animations of it and it can be astounding to you. Look at the relationship here with for example, for this chart, for example, what is this chart? I don't even know which one this is. This is the benzodiazepine use percentage for women and men. And then when you have that chart, and then you take something like this. Now, I know opioids and benzos don't go together, but just when you look at the relationship, even like every trend has a similar flow to it for these drugs when you see it. And the kids with these ranges here at 8.3 million, how many did you say you were able to see, or a general number, how many kids there are even in the country? 0 to 17, it can't be that huge of a number to where 8.5 million is a lot of kids in 2013 to have on psychiatric drugs.
The population of kids in the U.S. is 20 million or 24 million.
That's insane. That's insane. Yeah. So you're basically banking on 1/3 of the kids being on these drugs, and then it's a predictable result to say that you're going to have increases in erratic behavior when you're providing brain impacting pharmaceuticals to 33%. Of the 0 to 17 population.
And half these drugs, what kind of testing regime did they do before they actually decided that this is just go ahead and give it to the kids?
Yeah, and what I would say, what frustrates me more than anything on this whole thing is when you look at the gun death data compared to things like this, and it still just blows me away that no focus goes to pharmacy. Like if people want to make a case on drugs.
To be fair, there must have been some people talking about it because I had heard about this before you mentioned it.
Yeah, no, I know. I guess mainstream. Like when you talk about, you have the Bookers, the Trump, just all of the political mainstream, and they cite everything from video games to culture to right. Guns. And
you and I talked about this before. We haven't reached on this. What you're describing is a mechanism that might explain the breakdown and the coping mechanisms, which can lead to this sort of outburst behavior. And then, was it the video game? Was it the bullying? Was it the shitty boss? Did his car get broken into? Did his dog pee on his carpet? Whatever. If your coping mechanisms break down, the issue really isn't the thing that causes.
That's exactly right. No, you're exactly right. I see where you're going with this. Go on. I'm sorry about that.
No, you got exactly the point. it's not really, the issue isn't really the trigger. The issue is who put these kids on the brink where this kind of thing can happen.
Because the objective of training kids to be not kids, so teaching a child to be an adult, is that shit does fucking happen you don't expect, and this is how you fucking deal with it. Now I'm saying that more crass than I would to my 4-year-old, but basically, part of being in life is dealing with life, and that includes losing in video games at times, and being able to process that. The problem isn't the video game the kid is playing and that they lost and had their head blown off. The problem is they can't process losing, so they want to blow someone else's head off. That's the problem. And people get that mixed up to where, he wants to blow the head off because he saw it on the video game. No, it's because he lost and he doesn't know how to process losing, because you detached his receptors in his brain. His chemistry has been manipulated to where from his dopamine releases to any kind of serotonin release for stress, anything at all is all out of whack, because it's been out of whack for years. And now the visual stimulation has hit. He's gone, and that's I think the main issue.
It explains the extreme behavior too, from lethargy, I'm bored, I'm cool, to just like spraying the other end of it.
Yeah,
there's nothing in between. There's no.
Yeah, it always interests me how it seems we're becoming more manic as we get more manic drugs. It's pretty remarkable, actually. But you would expect to see the opposite trend of that if they worked.
You talked about it in the sense of anti-adaptive, like we're not learning the folks who are on these medications, the ones that stifle that feeling of stress that might motivate people to adapt. You might also look at it from the point of view like a Freudian repression. It might be that these drugs are keeping them from expressing their negative emotions in relatively harmless ways, so they never really get good at expressing them. And then when they finally just can't stifle them anymore, they come out in this outrageous way.
That's exactly. That's the big one. No processing gears. Go ahead. Sorry.
No, it's just the same idea. Maybe considered from the outside, like the repressive model as opposed to the adaptive model. We may be saying the exact same thing in just slightly different ways.
Yeah. So, well, man, I don't know what you think. I think this went really well for first time. It's 1:39 my time, and I could go until 4, but I need to be up in the morning. So I'm going to try to get some sleep. But I really enjoyed doing this, man. Maybe we'll have to do a couple more of this in between writing up something to submit here.
I'm all about it. The big ones on just trying to sum up and get ready for the writing. The two big ones are the demographic focus on the correlation, and the correlation between the overuse of these drugs, the overdiagnosis of these drugs, which we presume because they increased so much compared to population, and the increase in the spectacle shootings despite the decrease in violent crime. Like those two correlations, and really we're really talking about 3 correlations. It's one thing to say, well, correlation doesn't prove causation. It's another thing to say, well, those 7 correlations are just a coincidence, man.
Exactly.
All right, so we've got 6 folks joining us. Is there anything that we didn't cover that we should have?
I would say, my last thing I'll say is, I want to make it clear, I don't have a disdain for these farmers. I actually think that damn near, in fact, I think that everything which has been created does have a positive property, even if we haven't found it. And so with that, I think that there's a good utility to some of these drugs, but I don't think that the utility of them is being captured in the way that they're being diagnosed and sent out. So I want to make it clear, if anyone it's not like if someone sees this, hey man, this has been talked about with me. I got prescribed Adderall before, and I had to go through a process of my own to say, you know what, this shit was actually, I shouldn't have even prescribed this when I look at it backwards. And the way it got prescribed to me was kind of from the doctor engaging. So I had to work that backwards. But there's nothing wrong with them, other than they're not supposed to be lifestyles. They're supposed to be bridges to lifestyles. So if you have a 12 to 18 month, what's that? Go ahead.
No, this is exactly why they shouldn't be a lifestyle.
This data shows why making it a lifestyle means that, look, unless you can guarantee that you'll be able to keep up with the proper dosage with the body physical makeup as the body changes, then you're guaranteeing yourself you're going to have times you don't have the proper amounts, if you even need any amounts in there at all, which means you're guaranteeing these over responses on an emotional level from people without the equipment to manage them. That's what it kind of boils down to at the end of the day. So, but that was the last point I guess I wanted to make, that it's not like it's an anti-pharmaceutical thing necessarily. It's really the way it's being prescribed is just fucking wrong.
It's anti-misuse.
Yeah, exactly. So,
misdiagnosis. I think the immune system, like a psychic immune system, I think that metaphor may be worthwhile here.
Yeah, I like that. We might have to. I'll build off of that a little bit. So,
have you ever heard of Soma?
What's that?
You ever heard of Soma?
I have not.
SOMA. Soma is Aldous Huxley's name for this drug in Brave New World, and it was a drug that just sort of made you, it was a little bit hallucinogenic, just sort of made things easier, made the housework more interesting. You wouldn't fight with your buddies at work so much. Yeah, they say that Soma, Aldous Huxley, was actually talking about MDMA, ecstasy. But in terms of what he predicted and its effect on society, I think it's these drugs.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's really interesting. And I would agree completely with that. So,
Brave New World was basically 1984. Aldous Huxley wrote Brave New World, H.G. Wells wrote The Time Machine, and George Orwell wrote 1984. These guys are buddies. They all believed that humanity was facing a final revolution where the technology that we developed got used to suppress individuals' free will, and everybody just got sort of sucked along for the ride. And in Brave New World, he talks about Soma, this sort of hallucinogenic, soporific kind of drug where it kind of made you feel good, but you could still get your shit done. Back in the 80s, I said, if they legalize marijuana, I'm going to distrust them because they think they want to do it so that everybody just sort of puts up with shit. But I think this is the real thing. I think the drug that you've identified, these patents for, I think that's the real Soma. I think that's the real suppression of our, and that's probably why the politicians want to get to it. Right. Well, these guys are they're lashing out, and they're even the people that say, well, those guys that shot that school up, that's your faction, that's your guys.
Yeah.
But that's the admission that you think that faction has to lash out to change things. That's how trapped they feel. That's how it's almost.
Which if you feel like the other side has to do that, then the only response is to do the same. Therein which lies the larger problem with if we can't stop this kind of a misdiagnosis, misusage happening, then you have more of the society becoming less equipped to be able to work things out without these reactions. And ultimately, 30, 50, 40 years, whatever from now, those people end up being right, where it is that kind of a break, where people are only able to do things through outburst reaction. And that's called, basically having that's Rome is falling effectively. So and I'm not saying that that's what this will ultimately lead to. It's just another situation where, like you said, Soma, right? We want to be able to keep track of our brains.
That's right. Your annoying brain is giving you all this information and these emotions that make you gotta deal with this stuff. What a pain in the ass. Let's just shut it down. If you don't think so hard, it won't bother you so much.
Yeah.
And this is the thing that pisses me off too. How much of this is because some teacher's too fucking boring, and because they learned how to be boring from their boring.
I was perpetually distracted, and it's been the best thing for my career. So I'm thankful forever for the teachers that didn't think I needed to be prescribed because of my distraction, but instead focused themselves on making sure I was focused enough to learn. So that was, I would say, the difference. Miss Ricketts, I'll say, that was the one who I can easily say I was the most distracted with her. And she focused a lot on me to keep in touch. And that's like you being a teacher, that's half the battle. And now we're at a point where some of these teachers have been on the drugs their whole life themselves. So they're looking for people to like, oh, you have characteristics similar to what my mommy told me I had characteristics like at 5. So maybe I should see to your parents to have you put on this. And so anyway, but you will do this again if you're up to it. I really enjoy it. So
absolutely.
And then I'll hop off here but no, and thank you everyone who hopped on, Mandy, Jemiah, Renee for sure, and everyone else, but it was a fun discussion. I think we should do this more often, man. I appreciate it.
You know what? We could make it a regular thing. I think it'd be great.
Sounds like a plan.
Especially when you bring this level of detail, and you obviously did a lot of legwork. So thank you very much for showing it.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And I appreciate what you just said, Mandy. Hopefully we can get some of this data out. So right on. Y'all have a good evening there on the West Coast, and I'll talk to y'all tomorrow.
All right. Good, David.
Yep. See you. Bye.